The Boeing 787 Dreamliner boasts a stellar safety record. But this is its first fatal crash. What could have gone wrong? When investigators accessed the black boxes from Air India Flight 171, they were unprepared for what they would find. The findings didn't just answer questions, they raised entirely new ones. This was more than a tragic accident. The recorders were charred and dented from heat and impact, yet intact enough to promise one thing: the truth. Rushed under police escort to a high-security lab in New Delhi, they were meticulously examined by the AAIB. However, this wasn't just a local investigation. Within 24 hours, experts from the NTSB and the UK's AAIB arrived to assist. The aircraft was American-made, a Boeing 787, and had British nationals aboard. Under international treaties, many could join the probe. This was a rare, massive, multinational operation, with significant stakes. Inside the lab, investigators analyzed over 1,200 parameters. They also reviewed the final 2 hours of audio from the cockpit voice recorder. What they found was staggering. In the last 60 seconds before impact, the cockpit was filled with confusion and alarm. It all began 22 seconds after takeoff. One pilot says, "Gear up," and the co-pilot confirms. Then, a chilling pause follows, interrupted by a warning chime. Then another chime, a stall warning. The pilots exchanged rapid, overlapping commands, but sensed something was wrong. The aircraft wasn't climbing, the angle of attack was too steep. The engines were running, but the lift was gone. The crew called Mayday in a calm but urgent tone, just once. Then silence, broken only by their efforts to regain control. Investigators were struck by the calmness. They didn't yet know what they were facing. They had no time to react. Then came the flight data, revealing the first clear explanation. Just 14 seconds after takeoff, the flaps were fully retracted. This was far too early for such a critical phase, and with insufficient airspeed, the aircraft lost lift and stalled. The pilots never stood a chance. But here's the twist: the cockpit instruments still showed that the flaps were extended. The crew believed they were in a safe configuration, but they weren't. They were flying blind, misled by a system designed to protect them. That's when the real storm began. Aviation experts worldwide began pointing fingers, with many aimed straight at Boeing. The situation was disturbingly reminiscent of the 737 MAX disasters in 2018 and 2019, where software failures caused 2 fatal crashes. 2025 had already been a brutal year for Boeing. In January, a 737 MAX 9 lost its entire door plug mid-flight over Oregon. A hole ripped open in the cabin wall due to bolts that were never installed. Boeing's CEO resigned. The FAA froze MAX production, and in May, a Boeing 737-200 cargo jet was shot down over Darfur. Everyone on board died. Now, this wasn't a mechanical failure, but it added to the headlines for Boeing in a year already out of control. Then came June 12, the first fatal crash of a Dreamliner, Air India 171. 3 major Boeing incidents in 6 months. And the pattern doesn't end there. Whistleblower John Barnett, who had raised safety concerns, was found dead in a hotel parking lot. The official word was suicide, but within the aviation community, trust cracked. People stopped calling it a coincidence. Though the Dreamliner is a different aircraft, the pattern felt uncomfortably familiar. Automated systems misfiring, pilots misled, lives lost. Critics accused Boeing of fostering what they call automation arrogance, designing systems that assume software is always right. They failed to ensure pilots were fully informed or able to override in time. In Flight 171, the flap rating was faulty. This suggested either a sensor or actuator fed incorrect data to the cockpit, masking the real configuration. The Boeing 787's flap control system was designed to be fail-safe, equipped with redundant torque motors and encoders. However, one sensor failure, combined with deferred maintenance, may have been all it took. Inner sources suggested that just 1 month prior, the left wing flap actuator had been serviced due to sluggish retraction. parts were replaced, but due to a shortage, not all components were brand new. Some were overhauled units. Insiders claim that a torque sensor calibration check was deferred during the service window due to missing equipment. Deferred but not flagged for follow-up, these were routine events on paper, but might have been fatal in reality. Investigators looked into whether this malfunction could have triggered a failure cascade. Was the faulty flap rating misleading the systems? Did the autothrottle behave differently? These weren't just theoretical concerns. Data confirmed the autothrottle responded incorrectly. The engines delivered expected thrust, but with the wings producing much less lift than assumed, the angle of attack increased. In other words, the aircraft believed it was flying correctly, and so did the pilots, but it wasn't. This led to a chilling conclusion: the safeguards didn't just fail, they misinformed everyone involved. Public frustration boiled over. Whistleblowers pointed to past quality control lapses at Boeing's Charleston plant. Former engineers claimed production was rushed, inspections skipped, and cost pressures dominated over safety concerns. The FAA's controversial delegation of safety oversight to Boeing employees under the ODA program came under renewed fire. A former Boeing engineer told the BBC, "This isn't just a technical glitch, it's a system failure at every level." The international reaction to these findings was swift. The FAA issued an immediate bulletin to all U.S.-registered Boeing 787 operations. They required a recheck of all flap position encoders and torque motor feedback circuits. EASA followed suit within 48 hours. Back in India, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation ordered an urgent audit of all 787 Dreamliners in the country. India granted 4 aircraft for deep system checks, and at least 2 jets were found to have anomalies in flap motor performance. Though not as critical, these anomalies were enough to raise alarm bells. The Tata Group, which owns Air India, promised total transparency. They pledged a fleet-wide inspection protocol beyond the minimum requirements set by the DGCA. Behind the scenes, international memos suggested the company was shaken, not just by the loss, but by the implications. This wasn't just about a single crash, it was about whether their entire Dreamliner fleet could still be trusted by the public. They also set up a crisis support fund for victims' families, announcing 1 crore rupees, or about $120,000. This new fund would cover additional support, counseling services, long-term medical aid for the sole survivor, and relocation assistance. But the investigation wasn't over. 3 weeks after the black box analysis, a preliminary report was released. Investigators emphasized that while pilot error couldn't be entirely ruled out, the focus was on mechanical and systematic failures. A few days later, Boeing issued a global maintenance advisory, urging checks on flap actuator feedback encounters. They called on operations to ensure that deferred maintenance tasks involving flap systems would close immediately. But for many, this wasn't enough. Aviation analysts warned that Boeing's brand could suffer if systemic issues weren't addressed. The company's stock took a noticeable dip after the crash, and trust was beginning to erode. Meanwhile, global pilot unions and flight instructors called for a renewed focus on manual flying skills. Over the past decade, as aircraft became more automated, pilots had less time and training to handle rare but deadly malfunctions. Associations began lobbying for updated training that includes managing misleading cockpit data and flying without automation when necessary. As of now, the full investigation is expected to take another 3 to 4 months, with a final report due by November. International teams remain involved, with forensic engineers still analyzing recovered components and digital data streams. Meanwhile, families continue to wait for answers, for closure, for someone to say, "We know what happened and it won't happen again." And as for Vishwas Ramesh, the lone survivor, he was seated in 11A and miraculously survived the crash. His younger brother, Ajay Ramesh, sitting just across the aisle, lost his life. Vishwas carried his brother's coffin during the funeral. This deeply emotional moment was witnessed worldwide. He is now dealing with overwhelming survivor's guilt, regretting what happened. "If I had known, I would have switched." Maybe that's the real heart of this story, not just the black boxes. It's about the human side, the families, the survivor, and the people on the ground. They didn't ask to be part of aviation history. But now they are. If the final report confirms what early findings suggest, Boeing will face serious consequences. A flawed sensor system, misleading cockpit data, or deferred maintenance led to this crash. Boeing won't just be dealing with lawsuits. They will be dealing with a collapse of trust. After the 737 MAX crisis, the company promised change. But if critical failures still exist in their most advanced jets, Boeing risks financial fallout and losing credibility. If this story moved you or made you question the systems we trust, hit subscribe. We cover what others gloss over. And we do it with one goal: keeping you informed.